Welcome to the third installment of Monday Match Points. I have Craig Weedle with me here, and he's going to dive into a new topic that we have in the officiating world. But before we get to Craig, I just want to provide a couple of reminders for volleyball officials. One item that is coming up quick is the start of the NSA postseason. Sub-districts start on Monday, October 23rd, and they run through that week. My hope is to have all assignments posted to officials' login pages here within the next 5 to 7 days. So be on the lookout on your login pages. I think you also get an automatic email from our system if you get assigned something for the postseason. So be on the lookout for that. Additionally, a number of you indicated this on your application to work the postseason that you were interested in being a line judge at state. Thank you for doing that. If you are interested in doing that, being a line judge at state, and you didn't mention that on your application, please feel free to send me an email so I can have your name and have you under consideration for that. We'll keep all those on file and try to work that out as we move a little bit closer towards the state tournament. And then finally, before I turn it over to Craig, one item that has come up over the last couple of weeks is officials have the ability to upload a photo on their officials login page on our website. If you haven't done so, please do that so that we have a face to go with a name, especially if we're sending someone out to do an observation on you. It really does help to have faces with names when we're going through that. So if you have any questions or you need help doing that, let us know. But there's a pretty easy process to do that once you're logged in on our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig Weedle.
Yes. So what I wanted to do today is kind of talk a little bit about a new tool that many of you have used or you've probably seen being used, and that is with the headsets. I think it is a great tool to, especially for newer officials that are already kind of scared to work their matches. It's a great way to build confidence in the newer officials, as well as assist them in the heat of the moment when the match gets very heated with stuff. What I wanted to do is I just wanted to give some best practices that I've used, or I've actually asked some people to, some best practices of what they've used when they've used the headsets. Just because, like with anything, when something is new, you only know what you know until someone teaches you something. So just a couple things I want to kind of go over to begin with is one of the main things you need to make sure is that the headsets are synced before you start your match. Because one of the things we don't want to have happen is you get out there to the match, getting ready to do your coin toss, and you spend your whole time trying to sync the headsets. So we don't want you to do that. So make sure that they're synced before you start your coin toss. And if they're not synced and you can't get them to sync, it's okay. You don't need to use them. A couple other best practices is the R2 will do most of the talking. That's one thing with headsets, and it depends on who you work with. Some people like to talk a lot, some don't talk very often, but for the most part, the R2 will do most of the talking. Also, just as you pre-match all of your other duties, when you use headsets, it's a great idea to pre-match with your partner, just so you kind of are familiar with some of the terminology that we'll go through here in a second. But make sure you do a pre-match before you start. A couple things I want to go over here quickly is, as an R2, some of the things that you talk about or you might say while you're using your headsets. And I'm going to start with the R2, and then after I'm done with that, I'll go to the R1. So basically, as the R2 for in-out calls. So one of the things, and you'll also notice this trend as I kind of go through some more of these scenarios, but usually it's in sets of 3. So like, for example, if the ball's out, like if, let's say it's out on the sideline of the R2 may go out, 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 or in. So that gives the R1 an indication if maybe the line judge gives you a different signal of what the R2 sees. So that's a good one there. For touch calls, that's another one. You would go touch, touch, touch. But one of the things that I've noticed, and it's a training issue, is make sure that if it's an obvious touch that everyone in the gym sees, you don't need to say touch, touch, touch every time. But it's more of those that are kind of the micro touches that are over more on the R2 side or even on the R1 side. But use touch only if it ends the rally and is not super obvious. No touch, for example, you could say no, no, no. Don't say no touch, because in that kind of if people don't hear that no, then they'll think you said touch. So like if you notice there's no touch, just say no, no, no. Four contacts, a similar thing. You could go 4-4-4, and again, don't say no touch. Similar to what I said before. Net calls. So like if the R2 calls a net, one of the things that's helpful for the R1 is sometimes the R1 can't see what number was in the net. So like you could say net and then like number 8, for example. So then that way the R1 knows who was in the net. Here's another one that's really good is the libero handset in the front zone. There's different terminology. Some use libero, some use hands, but it's a good way to show or to tell the R1 if the libero is in the front zone and uses their hands to set the ball, just so they're aware of the next play that it can't be an attack. Another good one is back row block or attack. And I think this is a really good one for the R2 to kind of help the R1, because that's one of the bang bang plays that's really hard to determine if it's a back row attack or if it's a back row block. But if you guys are both talking to each other throughout the match, it'll help you so you could be aware of that when it happens. Another thing is every time that you give the court back after you do a substitution or a timeout, what a lot of people do is when they give the ready, they say ready. So the R1 knows that you're ready to go. Another thing is the ball passing behind the R1 stand. This is one that's kind of hard because if it goes behind the R1 stand, you may not know if it's supposed to be an out or a touch call, depending on if it crosses, completely crosses beyond the plane of the net. So that's another good one for the R2 to communicate with the R1 and say, hey, touch, or out. So then you're synchronized as far as the signal you're going to give. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the R1 and some of the things that they could do or help with the headsets. And as I mentioned before, for the most part, the R1 doesn't do a lot of talking because they're facilitating the match. But a couple things that are very helpful is, for example, for timeout requests, is because you have a good view of the benches, that if a coach is going to request a timeout, that's a good one. You could say, you could make the R2 aware of that. Another one is substitutions. Sometimes you may not see the substitution coming in. And again, the R1 has a good look at that. Another one is to help recognize when lineups are being delivered by the coaches. So that's one thing. And again, this is all stuff as the R1, you're able to see it as you're looking over the match. Another thing that's really good is to help communicate overlaps, because I know that's one of the biggest challenges a lot of people have is overlaps. And so as you both are working together, it's easy for, if one of you may see an overlap on the other side that you're not responsible for, you can maybe communicate to the R2, say, hey, 4 and 5 are overlapped. And another thing, I think this is one of the most helpful things, is as the R1, they do all the ball handling as far as calling, making a call on ball handling. And it's also a good confirmation to maybe even say to your R2, hey, would you have called that? So it builds confidence between the two of you as you work throughout your match. One other thing that we always get taught is the headsets do not replace our discrete signals or regular signals. So we want to make sure that we still do, like if there's a 4, you still give the signal a 4, or if the ball down, because the headsets could go out. So we don't want to train our brains to not use the signals anymore. So just make sure that you continue to use your signals. And again, keep conversations to a minimum. Less is more, because a lot of people, when you wear headsets, people, especially in the high school side, with them being new, they notice them. So just try to keep your conversations to a minimum. But anyway, so that's just some of the best practices that I've learned using the headsets over the last 5 years.
Thanks, Craig. Just a couple point of clarifications. We are by no means saying that any officials have to use headsets. This is one of those things that, as technology has advanced, it's a tool now that's available for our officials to use, and we allow it in Nebraska. So if that's something that you all, as an official, think is beneficial, by all means use them. One thing that I want to make very clear is that when we use these headsets, we're not going to use them for the first time at, say, a district match or a state match. We are going to allow them during the postseason, but if it's not something that you're comfortable with or used to, then that's not the time to use them for the first time. And then, as Craig has mentioned, technology fails. Sometimes we have problems with technology, and if those headsets go out, we're not going to stop the match to try to figure it out. We're not going to try to replace batteries, charge them, sync them up. We're not going to do any of that. We're just going to move on with the match and go back to, all of the regular mechanics that we've used for years before we were even able to use headsets. So with that, that's all we have today for Monday Match Points. Appreciate anybody tuning in, and I hope you got something useful out of it. We will see you next time. Thank you.